Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on active assailant preparedness. I'm Sherine Ebadi. I'm a former FBI agent, and I'm current managing director in Kroll's Forensic Investigations and Intelligence Practice. I'm going to be moderating today's panel. And before I introduce our panel of experts, we're going to have a question and answer session at the end of the segment. So to the extent that you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If appropriate, I may address some of them during the webinar, but for the most part, we're going to address those at the very end. I also know that some of you have sent in some questions in advance. We will also get to those at the end of the webinar. And so now to our panelists. Dan Linskey, he's here. He's our managing director in our security risk management practice of Kroll. He also heads our Boston office. He's a fellow at the Kroll Institute and the former superintendent-in-chief of the Boston Police Department. He was a 27-year veteran of the force, and among many critical incidents that he responded to, he also led the Boston Marathon bombings response. He now serves clients in diverse industries with experience in investigations, crisis response, and risk management. He does site assessments, facility security design, audit, compliance, as well as personal, physical, and operational security strategies. Dan has responded to active shooter incidents as a first responder, as well as responding after some of these events affected our clients, investigating what happened, identifying lessons learned, and trying to inform better prevention, deterrence, and recovery tactics. Matthew Dumpert is also a managing director, and he's now the global head of our security risk management practice. Congratulations on your promotion, Matt. Prior to joining Kroll in 2017, Matt was a U.S. diplomat. He was a special agent and regional security officer with the United States Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service. He spent a great deal of his career operating out of U.S. embassies abroad and was honored later in his career to serve as senior advisor to both the Secretary of State and the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome, Matt. And then we have John Best. John is a vice president of managed services at CRISP. CRISP is Kroll's online real-time risk intelligence practice. He previously served in law enforcement and intelligence capacities in the UK and was responsible for developing the country's covert online operations controls, specifically when it comes to investigating organized crime. So thank you, John, also for being here and for gracing us with your digital knowledge. So I'm going to jump right in. I mean, this is a grim topic. We don't have to look much further than just yesterday and last week to understand the reality of this topic. It's a very unfortunate reality, and the exact number of how many of these incidents occur every year is unknown. I mean, there's a lot of variation on that. Every time we turn on the news, it seems like we're learning about a new tragedy. The one thing that we do know is that it's an increasing number. This is not a new tragedy. It's not something that's new to our society, sadly. But in 2022, the FBI actually reported that active shooter incidents increased by more than 50% year over year. So it's an increasing number. I'm sure you all join me in hoping that one day this will not be the reality that we live in. But until that time comes, it's incumbent upon us to protect our people in our workplaces. We can't stick our heads in the sand and just wish that it was a better place. So not unlike we protect our physical and digital workspace, we also need to protect our most valuable resources, which are our people. I would guess that most of you already have some form of training in place to respond to active shooter incidents. Most companies do. It's a great start. But honestly, we're here today to convey to you that teaching your people to run, hide, and fight is just not enough. The goal of this webinar is to give you guidance on how to create a workplace that is not only reactive to incidents that may occur, but proactive and preventative. So with that, Matt, I'd like to start with you. Can you just give us a sense of what an effective threat management program looks like that is proactive and preventative as opposed to just reactive?
Yeah, Sherine, thank you. Thank you so much. And for everybody who joined us here, thanks for giving us your attention. You hit it right in the opening remarks, Sherine. This is a human problem that requires solutions that address the underlying human elements that lead to violence. A comprehensive active assailant program addresses things well before somebody comes to the workplace with the intention of committing violence. We're talking about training our people on how to spot potential red flags of violence. What are those underlying things that may present, they may be observable? In a significant number of active assailant incidents, there is leakage. People talk to their colleagues, to their friends, to their family members about their struggles. They talk to people about the stressors in their life. They exhibit behavior that may be questionable. They may suffer from mental health ailments. They may have changes in their lifestyle, changes in their demeanor, in their attitudes. There may be red flags to their friends and family and coworkers and loved ones and supervisors that are observable. The idea, and the list is long on what these red flags may be, and we can get into that. The list is long. The idea is to train our people to be receptive to these notions, train our people to understand that this is a human problem. These are not statistics. These are humans that are inflicting violence of an incredible nature on people that a lot of times they have known, they have a relationship with, and there's an underlying grievance that was unaddressed early in its manifestation. So training people on what to look out for, training people on what those red flag indicators of potential violence that show us somebody may be traveling along this pathway toward violence. We know that people don't wake up in the morning and all of a sudden decide to engage in extreme violence like we see. We know that people don't, quote unquote, snap, or to borrow a phrase from the 90s, they don't go postal. We know that there are issues that are observable. There are stressors in people's lives that are observable. And if we can bring hindsight a little bit closer to real time, we'll all be better for it. So it's training our people on what to look out for. What are those stressors? What are those red flag indicators that may suggest that somebody needs help? It's not necessarily that they're going to be an active shooter or an active assailant today, tomorrow, next week, next month. These signs, these symptoms show us that people are in distress and they may need outside intervention. They may need help before they escalate things, before they travel along that pathway to violence. And it's also training a team of people within your company, within your organization, on what to do next. This is not a haphazard process. There's methodology here that needs to be in place. How do you properly investigate reports that are made? How do you properly take that investigation and assess all of its elements for potential of violence? And then how do you erect good governance around a program like this? There has to be training in all of these things. And then we have to provide our people with the proper tools to carry this out. Where are we getting this quote unquote threat intelligence from? Some of it is spoken. Some of it's leaked through emails or online correspondence. There's a tremendous amount of information that we can learn from somebody's online and social media presence. There are elements of their life, whether things are going well or going poorly for them, that may be represented in social media. There are elements that can be derived from public record that can help paint this picture. So the key here is of course, training our people what to spot, training a team on how to properly investigate and assess it, and then providing our people with the tools that they need to be effective here. That's the intelligence tools to capture what's publicly available, and it's the tools to keep it all straight. What type of a case management program are we going to use to keep these incredibly complicated matters straight so that it's actionable and we don't lose critical time throughout these processes? Sherine, I know that was long. I know that it was drawn out. I hope that addresses the question. This is something that is tremendously close to us. We do this work every day here at Kroll. We help our clients through some of these pain points. And, even in scheduling this webinar, we struggled with the timing of it. We were trying to do it at a time where it wouldn't seem like we were addressing headline news. Well, we didn't have that luxury. Every time we looked for a great time to schedule this and address our audience and convey what we've been working on, there was another incident. So anyway, I appreciate the time. I appreciate everybody's time, and I really look forward to this discussion. Danny, John, Sherine, thank you so much.
Matt, one thing that comes to mind when I hear you talk is that I'm sure a lot of, probably the majority of businesses around this country where this problem affects, but around the world as well, the people don't have backgrounds in security. They don't have backgrounds in responding or even observing and understanding these types of things. We come from law enforcement backgrounds and intelligence backgrounds. And so for us, this may be a little more second nature, but I think it would be helpful, and maybe Danny, I'll turn this to you. You spent so much of your career helping our clients and regular clients. I mean, we're not talking about clients that you would expect to have a robust security apparatus, but regular businesses, schools, places of worship, and other clients, how to secure their people and their places. And I'd really like to hear from you what some realistic expectations or advice that you give those clients on how they can implement this type of threat management, threat intelligence, risk management, whatever we're going to call it, program.
Thanks, Sherine. And the most important thing is to recognize that this is a safety concern. This is a safety concern for every employer, every employee. We owe it to our folks to make sure we're keeping them safe and secure. If we've got individuals who are in crisis, who are going down a path of violence, and we don't take possibilities to intervene and prevent them from furthering themselves down a path of violence, we're doing a disservice to that individual, as well as to all of the potential people who could be impacted for when they do have that moment. When this is effective, Sherine, it's valued, it's measured. We work with clients all the time who look at injuries, and they determine that PPE, personal protective equipment, will prevent injuries. Because they're measuring it, they're looking at it, they see a cost to it, and they realize that the intervention strategy prevents that problem from occurring. Same rules apply here. This is a suicide situation where people are committing suicide by engaging in homicide. For whatever reason, people have decided they want to end their life. They don't have the courage or they don't want to take their life by their own hand. They want to engage in the taking of innocent lives and force a police officer to engage with them to either physically end that threat, or when they encounter the police officer at that very moment, that gives them the courage or the cowardice, whichever you want to call it, to self-inflict harm. We need to realize that that's a reality that's going on with people and human beings. Human beings have a hierarchy of needs. And when I was a young cop studying as a supervisor, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everyone wants to have air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction, right? That's all human beings have that need. If you're not meeting those goals, if you think you're not going to have a place to sleep, if you're losing your job, if the IRS is just attached to your paycheck, if you've lost a relationship, those psychological needs are interrupted. We have safety needs. We want personal safety and security. We want employment. We want resources. We want health. We want to own things. We want to go on vacations. We want to engage in friendships, feel valued, have trusted relationships. We want self-esteem. We want to be self-actualized and feel that what we're doing is valued. And along those hierarchy of needs, if something's going on in people's lives, and those needs aren't being met, they can go off the track and they can start down this road where, what seemed like yesterday before 8:30 in the morning, a well-adjusted kid who has a report of being an athlete who was working for a bank, instead engages in violence and takes innocent lives for whatever reason we don't know. But somewhere along the line, could there have been an intervention process that could have stopped it? And if we're missing those cues to stop it, we're doing a disservice to all of our folks who are possibly going to be in that location when that person shows up that day. We need a team from HR, from operations, from the general counsel's office. Maybe it's an outside counsel. We need somebody from personnel. We need somebody from the security team. We need the day-to-day management and operations where there's a weekly call or a daily call. It depends on the tenor and tempo. I've worked with hospitals who have us, because they value safety and security, every morning there's a call on safety and security, and everyone in that hospital is reporting whether it's slip and fall incidents, whether it's a missing patient, whether it's extended wait times in emergency rooms. Those things can impact patient safety, and they measure and look to see what's going on. They evaluate how many they have on their plate, and if there are any solutions they can put in place to change them. The teams that we've worked with at Kroll that are most effective at this have all those folks sitting around the table when either an employee or a supervisor comes forward and says, hey, something's going on with Dan. He lost his relationship with his wife. He's fighting with his kids. He's showing up with alcohol in his breath. His job performance has changed. We went on social media and we saw some stuff that he's concerned about firearms, and he's making statements that make us concerned. Well, can we intervene and see whether there's something can we provide an EAP program to Dan? Can we talk to Dan's family? And we've had threats where we've reached out to the family, and once they found out what was going on, they were able to get their family member help and intervene in that solution. We've had threats where, and Sherine, you and I worked a case together, where we started going down the red flags with the client, and quite frankly, we ran out of room on the paper with the number of red flags that were there, and we said, we've got to intervene with law enforcement here. This is a powder keg waiting to happen. It looks like there's some planning going on here. There's some idolation already. We need to engage with this person and make sure that they don't have the ability to access firearms. And we engaged with law enforcement on behalf of the client. They were able to engage this individual and get them off the books. We know that termination is a huge key for this. Are we tracking the number of terminations? Are we identifying, okay, when we're letting somebody go for a cause, right? How are we doing it? Is there a process where we can help people get from, I was working here, I was happy here, my livelihood I thought was safe and secure, to I don't know what my next week looks like? Can employers work to get people to think about the future? The clients that we've been most successful with often say, listen, we want to make sure they got medical coverage for the next couple of months when they go forward. We want to give them separation pay to make sure that they can plan and go forward. We want to offer them some job training so that they can make plans going forward. Not every solution is for that, right? Some people you might just have to let go, but if we can tailor the exit, knowing that that's a pain point, then we can also at the same time maybe look at their social media, see if they're thinking ahead, see if they're talking about jobs and opportunities and still have relationships, or if they're starting to go down a dark road and we've got to do some other intervention to make sure that we're keeping them safe. Are we tracking FLMAs in companies to see if somebody's got a critical medical issue that's impacting them or impacting their family? Are we tracking attachments to people's wages where, we had cops at the Boston Police Department who were, quite frankly, we used to call them the staple check, because the most valuable thing on their check was the staple with the attachment to the alimony payment. If they didn't do overtime, they couldn't pay their bills. Well, if overtime stops and that's their life they live in and we're not tracking that, then that's going to be a pain point. And if we haven't figured out how to help them through that process, right? Maybe it's some financial counseling, whatever, we can't help them. So we need dedicated teams that are looking at these types of challenges that can cause people to have stressors in their life and see if we can identify what those stresses are and what can we do to take those stresses out from in front of our employee. We owe it to the employees. More importantly, we owe it to all of our employees and their families to keep our entire environment safe. And we have to make sure that while we have teams in place to do this work, they create a culture where it's okay to have that conversation, where I'm not being the tattletale saying that Dan showed up drunk at work. And do we report every time, have I ever gone out to a retirement party and came into work and wish I had more sleep and had gone home earlier? Absolutely. Does that mean I'm on the road to destruction? No. But when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, when you look at an individual and you say, this isn't Dan, this isn't Matt, this isn't John, this is not Sherine, there's good cause and reason for that. And I owe a duty to my coworkers to step up and speak up on their behalf if they're in a place where they're going to need some intervention.
And what we're doing here, Sherine, if I can highlight for the audience some critical things that Dan said. This, and going back to your introduction, this is a human problem. These are human beings that are inflicting incredible violence. Human beings, as Dan referenced Maslow's hierarchy, have needs and wants and desires and fears and apprehensions and families and friends, right? Human beings need to be cared for in a way that is more than a number. And that goes into the way that we treat these problems. We have to treat these as if they're human born. We have to think of intervention strategies that can help address the human needs. And showing the run, hide, fight video, although it's great content, right? And we have to be prepared. unfortunately, I hate that I have to say that, but we absolutely have to be prepared on how to respond, whether it's at the workplace or a public venue, if we're out on a weekend with friends and family. We have to know how to react in the event of extreme violence. We have to know how and when to run, how and when to hide, and how and when to fight for your life. We have to know those things. I'm not discrediting the content that's put out. What I'm saying is this is a far deeper problem. And if we're going to protect our workplace, our friends, our families, our loved ones, and our colleagues in a powerful way, we have to address these issues before these people ever get close to committing horrific violence.
Thanks. So Danny and Matt, a lot of what you're talking about are things that are observable sort of in the physical realm, right? Back in the day when we all used to go into offices. I mean, as you can see, I'm doing this from my house. Apologize in advance if my dog barks. But we live in a world that's largely virtual now, or hybrid in many cases. And even when not, I think there's, segments of the population that don't have close relationships at work. They don't confide in people that they work with. They don't trust their supervisor to tell them what's going on. There are things where maybe they're not visible in the physical realm. And we know how much time people spend on social media these days, especially the younger generations. I mean, I think I looked at my daughter's phone when she was in high school, and it was some ungodly number of hours she was spending on social media every month, right? Which we curtailed, but people do spend copious amounts of time on the internet, on social channels, in chat rooms, on forums, and things like that. And I think just looking back over the past recent incidents, we know that people often share their intents or expose some of these things that you're talking about in the physical realm in the online realm. And so I'd really like to hear John talk to us a little bit. I mean, your expertise is in the realm of risk detection in the digital universe, right? What role does technology play in a good prevention program or a good detection program? And can you explain what it actually looks like for companies? I mean, not every company that's going to be implementing this has the capacity to monitor all of their people's social channels 24/7. So talk to us a little bit about what role technology plays and what that actually would look like for companies.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sherine, and thanks for having me on this. It's a fascinating thing for me. I'm in the UK. We fortunately don't talk about active assailant issues every day, but obviously there's a huge part that technology can play in very much picking up all the signals that Matt and Danny are talking about, that they advocate businesses to look at in the physical world. All of those signals are absolutely observable in online spaces, and in 2023. Our lives are, as you say, very heavily involved in the digital world. You talk about the younger generation, but I have my mum who is in her 70s over at the weekend, and she spent most of her time glued to her iPhone, sat in a house where the grandchildren are running around doing physical things. So everybody has that connection to the physical world, including those that are entering crisis, that are exhibiting those red flags that we are saying companies need to be looking out for. But it's really difficult. The internet is a big old place, and trying to suck in all of the internet into a computer and say, come on, then artificial intelligence, tell me who the problems are, is really, really difficult. And actually, anybody that's saying we collect the whole internet and can give you the risks is probably not telling the truth. So what I would always say is you've got to have a strategy around what your online risk awareness looks like. Here at CRISP, we very much take a risk-based approach to detection. We are always looking across 3 different areas. So we call it the who, the where, and the what. When we're talking about who, it's which actors are most important for us to listen to, which ones are going to provide us with those digital risk signals. And that might be based on a business, about detractors, known detractors from a business. It may be influential figures. It may be law enforcement channels, but we look at who are the important people to listen to. And then we think about where, and where someone's having a conversation online can very much change the context, exactly how it can in the real world. So, we know the internet is full of a broad spectrum of different online spaces. We've got apps, we've got gaming forums, there's technology sites, there's mainstream social media. All of that provides a different context depending on where a conversation's happening. So if somebody's talking about going down to Fifth Avenue and blowing up the plaza on a Grand Theft Auto gaming site, that's going to have a very different context to someone that's on one of the alt tech platforms on 4chan talking about it in such a way that may really start rising that level of concern and that red flag. So the where in digital chatter is really, really important. And then lastly, it's the what, and this is the hard bit. And tech has a great ability to bring in lots and lots of information and sort it in volume. But without that combination of specialist analysts that are looking at new risk terms, new emerging trends, and then able to interpret the output of what technology gives you, you end up generating just a huge volume of noise, a huge volume of false positive reports that could overwhelm a company, could completely allow them to miss the important signal that's hidden there. And that's the thing. We've talked a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy. An important bit of that is people want to feel part of something. People want to feel part of a group, of a community, and because of that, they will leave clues to what they're doing. We see manifestos posted prior to tragic incidents taking place. We see people leaving messages saying what their intentions are because they want to be seen, they want to be accepted, they want to be heard. And it's in those digital chatter that the clues that can go from we have a concern, we have a number of red flags, into right, we're now at intervention point, we're now contacting law enforcement, we're now into an employee support program, wherever we are. But it's that intervention point that can often be supported through those signals online.
All that makes sense. I think the one thing that comes to my mind is like, are employers expected to troll their employees' social channels, looking out for red flags so that they can intervene? And that seems slightly invasive of privacy and slightly onerous for an employer. So talk to us a little bit about, again, like, what exactly would a threat management or risk management program at a business do in this case? I mean, are they looking at everyone? I know you talked about the who, the what, and the where. How do they even know?
So it's a really good shout out, Sherine. We've got to have that balance between privacy and security, and nobody wants the events that we saw yesterday to happen, and that's going to be a challenge. But we've got to rise up to that challenge and find appropriate ways of sifting through that digital chatter to find those signals that allow the intervention. And practically, what we find working with companies is that if you have well-defined policies that are really clear on where the engagement points are, where the collection points are, that you end up in a safe space when looking at the events that you're trying to prevent. We're talking about loss of life here. We're not talking about people falling out over Facebook over something that's happened with their next door neighbours. I think the best way I can talk about this is going through an example where we've used that risk-based approach in order to get to an intervention point that I think everyone will be comfortable around, that the privacy angle of it doesn't become a concern. So for a company that we were working with, we look for, when we talk about the who, we look at the important assets they have, the brands and the people in their organization that are important to them. And then through monitoring mentions of those online, not looking at any specific people, we identify an individual who expresses a load of negative sentiment towards one of their employees. That gets reviewed, human review, and escalated, and through a deeper dive open source, look at the information that's available around this individual. We identify an obsession with firearms, we identify live stream video showing alcohol abuse, and we identify a real world threat of an intention to visit the company to cause harm to one of their employees as a result of what was perceived by them to be an extramarital affair that was taking place. So joining those dots up, we're able to put in place a notification to them, say, look, you've got a concern here. This is something that you need to be intervening on. But crucially, in relation to this, is there's no privacy concerns there. We're not looking at the employee that's the target of this. We're looking at the brands and the assets they have, and it's the mention of those combined with the risk signals that go alongside it that lead to that early intervention. But really recognise that this is hard, and there are a number of things businesses can do. To try and do that on scale as an individual business is really difficult. But even if a company took a view on their own generated content, so company review sites like Glassdoor, when we have a review of those in a company, are we doing it for brand reputation, or are we joining it up with the other risk signals that Matt and Danny are talking about? Are we thinking, right, we've recently had to let somebody go, and they may have gone into a state where they're dissatisfied with the company. They go and post something on Glassdoor that makes a load of accusatory comments about how the business is run, some really negative sentiment towards them. Does that join up the picture? Does that form part of an investigative strategy to reduce the risk of active assailant incidents? But my experience with working with companies is that's not the case, that they are very much looking at that. And you can apply that across a load of different spaces that companies work in. So, your social media moderator who is really driven on looking at engagement stats and looking at how many follows and likes their comments have got. Are they reviewing the comments that are made on those posts with the view of, here's someone that's dissatisfied, here's somebody that is potentially giving us one of those red flags, do we need to trigger that investigation? Does that make sense in terms of how you can effectively go about this without sort of tripping over those privacy concerns that are real and genuine and need to be considered?
No, absolutely. I think that's really helpful. And I think it's important to note that you're not standing up like you don't need to hire 17 people to do this. Essentially, you're repurposing people and functions that you already have and teaching them to look out for different indicators and different flags and things like that. And one of the premises that we're sort of basing all of this on is something that, Matt, you said pretty early on, was that people don't just wake up and snap and decide they're going to go in and shoot up their workplace or former workplace or whatever it might be. I think there's a statistic out there that's 89% of active assailants have premeditated their violence. And over half of them have expressed that premeditation somewhere, to someone or in writing, online, somewhere. So there are indicators. These aren't just random acts of violence, the vast majority of them, and therefore there are chances for intervention along the way if we're paying attention. I think I'd like to talk a little bit. I know we had a question that came through the chat also about what exactly are these indicators. I mean, the fact that someone's drinking more than normal, or they're getting divorced, or by the way, their wife, or husband has attached their paycheck for child. I mean, like suddenly this person's going to become an active assailant. Do we need to be worried about them? What are the indicators, and what are we looking for? I mean, it's not just seeing those things, but like, what are we looking for in them, and when do they rise to the level of some form of intervention?
Sherine, we both work for law enforcement organizations, right? We worked in the Department of Justice, and we brought justice folks. The scales of justice. All of the indicators are just pebbles on a scale. And you start to weigh the scale, and you say, okay, there's a issue with a relationship. There's an issue with alcohol. There's an issue with performance, right? The scale starts to look. That's why you need a team that's got cross people across the company who know people, right? And they might say, you know what? Yeah, Dan's having a bad day. He's got some financial issues, what have you, but he's in a good place. We've had a conversation with him. If you look on his social media, he's still looking at his life ahead of him. He's active with his church. He's active with his kids. So we've kind of had that conversation. Do we have to look every time, every bit? No. But when the scale gets out of whack, and it's that human instinct where we say to ourselves, I should do something here. And I'll share a personal story of being a chief of police, pulling up to one of my police stations. I was going to do a surprise visit, and I see a detective get out of her vehicle, and she's going into roll call, and she's running late. and it looked like she had been out late at night, and it looked like she probably had a hard night of drinking. She's a personal friend of mine. I've worked cases with her. We grew up in the organization together. She's a personal friend who's had some challenges in her life. There was some litigation that occurred. There was a use of force incident that occurred. She had some stressors that were going on in her life. I was going to walk into that station, but it became apparent to me that if I walked in the station, I was going to have to encounter the detective directly. And I would either have to turn a blind eye in front of everyone and pretend I didn't see somebody who probably shouldn't be at roll call in the condition she was in, and have to be the boss. And I was a coward that day, Sherine, I'll tell you. I decided, you know what? I don't want to have a confrontation with my friend. Not today. I'll deal with this another day. And I left that parking lot. I didn't go in. I didn't engage that police station. I went to another police station and engaged them. I think it was 3 weeks later, her name came across my desk. She was positive in a drug test. At that point, there's no intervention I can do. We've got policies and procedures. Once you got a positive result, we had to take action against the employee. That went down a bad road. That employee lost their job, lost their livelihood, was separated from the department, and eventually, unfortunately, died as a result of what we believe to be an overdose of narcotics. That's a regret I'll carry to my grave, that I didn't intervene and intercede that day. I failed in my mission as a supervisor, and I failed my friend that day. We don't want everyone to think that you have to be running around and talking about everyone's personal life. But I knew when I saw that detective that she was in crisis, and I didn't take action to address it. Again, it's a regret I have. We want to make sure the teams are getting information, finding out what they need to do, doing an investigation. Sometimes they look in and boom, nothing to see here, right? Somebody made a threat, and then you look at it and it was harmless banter in the lunchroom. Okay, that's why it's got to be a focus of the organization, and there's got to be a process and a culture that allow people to, some of this stuff is going to have to be reported anonymously. In order to get people to come forward, we need to have internal culture systems where, just want to let you know, Matt isn't wearing PPE and he's not complying with the safety programs online too, right? Dan isn't doing this, Dan isn't, and it's not that you're tattling, it's just that if somebody doesn't do something, someone's going to get hurt. And that person that get hurt could be me or it could be other employees. So if you've got an effective threat management team who's focusing on these things, they're listening to the digital chatter when appropriate, right? We don't have to listen all the time, every time. Obviously, some of the digital chatter, if someone's threatening to hurt our plant from outside, we want to be hearing that stuff and alerting for stuff. But, hey, Matt's got these 4 things that have popped up. We're assessing it. What else is going on in Matt's life? If you look at his social media and Matt hasn't engaged and he was on Twitter 3 times a day, that might be, and some of this is a conversation with the employee. Hey, what's going on with you? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? Why? What do you think is wrong with me? Well, I can tell you, we got a report that you've been losing productivity. We got a report that you were showing up to, we pulled your time and attendance. You're swiping in half hour late for the past 3 weeks. You're leaving early. Your reports aren't done. You're making mistakes. You had 2 accidents with the forklifts. What's happening? Can we do something to help you out? If we take all those steps and try and intervene, and we did everything we could, well, we don't have any regrets. God forbid it goes to a bad day. That's when, unfortunately, as Matt says, we do have to do the training. It's not enough to play a video. You actually have to make it real. You have to make sure it's reinforced. And then you have to train people how to deal with that crisis when it occurs. These events are over in 2 minutes. I train people that start your watch, because emotionally you're trying to survive that. Emotionally, your family is going through that with you. But you know that after 2 minutes, most likely you're going to survive this event. But you're probably going to be there for 4 hours, locked in a closet, waiting for somebody to let you out, communicating with your family and friends, terrified. So you've got to get the mindset to survive it. If, God forbid, we can't intervene and prevent it from going forward. We would much rather, instead of, and we do a good job of, unfortunately, training clients to mitigate the loss of life, I would rather be successful in working with clients ahead of time to prevent the loss of life. And that requires people to care about each other, to get involved in this conversation, and to come forward with information when they have it. And those in charge of analyzing that information, assessing it, and coming up with interventions need to be doing that as well.
Yeah, I think it was right in our introduction to this webinar that more needs to be done. I'm here to tell you that this is heavy stuff. We work with clients all the time that are weighing on the scales of justice, performance issues, potential drug issues, mental health issues. How do they respond? How do they treat their employees in a way that allows them to maintain dignity, but also gets to the bottom of and the root cause of what's going on? We talked about leakage. We talked about picking up some of this chatter, some of this leakage online and through social media. I'm here to tell you what we do with our clients, and what we're here to present on is raising awareness and breaking down barriers and breaking down silos. We know that of those that have been studied, 56% of active assailant, active shooter events have leaked some element of their plan to somebody who actually observed it. We know that 62% of these incidents involve somebody who is struggling with mental health. 57% had instances where there were abnormal interpersonal interactions. 46% change in work environment, 42% degradation of school performance, threats were made or had confrontations in 35%, firearms related behavior in 21, weight loss or eating changes in 13. The list goes on and on and on. We have exhaustive data to support what we're saying. Exhaustive data to suggest that we have to take a different approach. We have to address these issues, these underlying human-born stressors before our colleagues, our friends, and our loved ones have the opportunity to engage in violence.
And Sherine, if I could just follow up on Matt.
Just one question for Matt, because I think that's really relevant, but I think it would be helpful. So, for example, if it's someone that is always, I think one of the indicators is that people, lack hygiene. If the person always lacks hygiene, is it relevant that they didn't shower today, right? If the person is always sort of despondent, is it relevant that they're despondent today? If the person, generally doesn't say hello to you, is it relevant that they're, what I mean? Like all these indicators, can we talk a little bit about understanding the baseline for people? Because really the indicators are only relevant if they're out of whack with the baseline. Am I wrong?
Sherine, you're right on. And that's why the threat management team has to have a broad base of team leaders on it that know people, that know the day-to-day operations. And if somebody doesn't have good hygiene, and that's the way they always have been, you know what? That's probably not as big of a problem as somebody who is all of a sudden, who used to be squared away, who now doesn't care about the way they look. Somebody who is always late for work, that's a management issue and a personnel issue. Someone who, time for time was early often, and all of a sudden they're not making it, and they're not showing up, and they're not there on game day. That's the change from the base, and it's that change from the baseline that the folks walking the floor can let the threat management team know, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here. We have to do something here, right? And maybe it's, hey, you go in and you investigate it, and it's what's going on? Why are you late? My sister lost her kids to DSS, and I've taken the 2 kids into custody, and I got to get them to school in the morning. It's not something I was doing 6 months ago, but I'm trying to do it. Well, you know what? We can make an accommodation if we know that's the case to try and start your shift later, or have an understanding, or maybe there's a daycare we can put you in place with it at work. So it's the off baseline change. But I do want to talk. Matt and I hit you with a lot of statistics. I read this stuff. I dig into this stuff, and I do a lot of training for companies. I do a lot of training for law enforcement. If you don't read the after action reports of these unfortunate, hideous events and identify what worked, what didn't work, where did the train go off the tracks, and you're in charge of safety and security for your facility, for your people, you're doing yourself and your team a disservice. Attorneys are constantly looking at case law to make sure they're prepared so they can put the best case forward for their clients. Doctors are constantly looking at the journals of medicine to determine, what are the underlying effects of this disease, what medicine, what interventions help with that. We need to be doing that same thing when you get these after action reports, or the Secret Service does an analysis of the last 4 years of active shooter events, or the FBI does an analysis of these are the things that were present in the active shooters before they had that bad day and engaged in violence and took lives. So if we're not doing our homework up front, we're failing our teams, and we want to make sure that people know this is out there. These documents are public. We'd be happy to, if you reach out and you don't have access to them, we'd be happy to share them with you. The Kroll team, we're constantly, I got 4 today from Steve Powers on our West Coast group on what's going on in the threat world in clients' industry out there. It's important to be informed and updated and to make sure you're making knowledgeable advice and guidance to your senior leadership on what needs to be done.
That's a great point. John, I want to talk a little bit about some of the online indicators. I mean, not everybody writes a manifesto. Not everybody is clear in what they're conveying. If you could talk to us a little bit about what some of the triggers you look for beyond the obvious, like I'm going to go to Fifth Avenue and shoot a bunch of people or whatever it was, the example you gave earlier. What are some things that would trigger intervention from an online perspective?
I think this is a difficult space. This is not an easy area to work with, and we work really hard here to keep up with what the triggers are, what the risk terms are. I think some advice I would sort of pass on to those that are tackling with this is keep in mind that things change regularly online. The online world moves quicker than anywhere else. There's new apps, there's new games, there's a new algorithm that causes you challenges, and you need to adapt what you're doing, what you're looking for in line with those change. And I think the best sort of example of that is we've all got used to updating our antivirus software. We regularly patch that and don't think twice about it. It's no different here with online risk. So trying to keep up to date, as challenging it might be, you need that constant input. You need that refresh that happens in real time to stay on top of this. We talked a bit about Maslow's, and I've said people want to be heard, but they will also want to be heard in ways that evades that detection. I think the most extreme example of this that we've seen is we had a far right group that infiltrated a knitting and crocheting site, and were actively using that site as a place where they could discuss their hate, their intentions in a way that didn't attract and didn't breach the trust and safety policy of that particular website, because funnily enough, they didn't have to have a hate policy for the knitting and crocheting normal community. So, it's understanding that things change, that people will try and hide away their activity, which makes this such a difficult problem. Another area that I would sort of advocate people thinking about is just how social media platforms are designed. They're designed to bring communities together. They are written in such a way to get people to connect with each other that wouldn't ordinarily connect. And the very nature of that is someone that's going down that sliding pathway, that is experiencing dissatisfaction for whatever reason, that is exhibiting any of those signals that Matt's just been through. If they're online, they're probably going to be joined up with people that think and behave in the same way as them. And there are communities out there that will actively revel in the opportunity to amplify that behavior, to encourage that behavior, to the reality of seeing something in the real world playing out that they have fantasized about online becomes a real driver. So, I go back to the where and the who. Listening to those people is a really important aspect of looking at those key trigger events. And then the last thing that I would just put on people's radar is the risks that individuals and companies expose themselves to through their online activity. So we will look at people's digital footprints and say, what information is available online to somebody that wants to plan an attack, cause harm to an individual or to a company or to a location, and thinking really carefully about that to make sure that you are not exposing yourself unnecessarily without good reason for it. And example of this, based only on having the name of an exec of a large business, we were able to identify where the children go to school, what sports fixtures they're involved in, the running route the individual takes on a regular basis. So much information gets leaked out in the digital world that somebody that wants to cause harm can utilize, and companies having an awareness of what that information looks like and how they can control it and monitor it do a lot better job at protecting their employees, protecting their really important assets.
Sherine, if I
Danny,
can
go
make
ahead.
a that we haven't made yet, and it's part of what the threat management team should be looking at, is domestic issues. You know, God forbid my relationship ever goes off the rails and my wife is physically afraid of me and she's had to get a protective order and go to court because I'm in a bad space and she's physically afraid of harm coming from me. She's staying with friends and I don't know where she's staying. I can be assured where she's going to be for 8 hours a day at her work. And, you know, we don't see a number of targeted groups going at companies, right? The most likely threat is a disgruntled former employee or a domestic partner who knows that there's an employee there that they want to engage in a violent event with. And it can be difficult to have a life experience like a relationship that's gone bad. People feel sometimes timid to come forward and say, look, I'm in a place where I had to physically go to court and get an order to keep myself safe, to keep this person from hurting me. They might not want to share that with the world, but we've got to educate our team members that they've got an obligation to share that with the company so the company can take appropriate action to keep them safe. It could be something as simply as, Sherine, well, that's going on. Why don't you work remote and stay at your friend's location? We don't want you coming in the office where you could expose your location to your person who's looking to stalk and hurt you, right? It could be providing physical security with the base building, having a picture of myself if I'm the attacker, knowing what my car looks like. We've gone so far as to put license plate reader plates into some of our clients who have them on campuses to let me know that individual has come on campus with that plate and there's a violation of restraining order there. And then we work with the clients, and the client's HR team works with the victim to have conversations about, are there folks in your inner circle that you feel comfortable sharing that information with? Do we send out a company-wide blast? No. We want to respect privacy, but if there are 10 people that I work with who know my situation, who know what my abuser looks like, well, if we could let them know, those are 10 extra eyes that as they're coming to and from, and they're a block away from the company at the train station, and they see me hanging there waiting for, you know, Michelle to come up those subway stairs, they can alert security, they can alert law enforcement. And that's, you know, something that's counterintuitive when you think that's a relationship is personal. But in fact, if a personal relationship comes to my work, then my coworkers are in danger if that person's looking to harm me. So it's another important fact that our threat management teams have to be tracking those and looking to make sure that there's intervention strategies on those issues as well.
And Sherine, if I can highlight, one of the important things I want to really just underscore here is everybody's entitled to a bad day. What we're looking at is the totality of everything that's going on in somebody's life. If somebody recognizes behavior that they now know is concerning, or that based on a sixth sense or their own training and experience, they know is concerning, and they step forward and they say, I witnessed this concerning behavior from one of my colleagues. It may be but one piece of the puzzle. I talked about breaking down barriers. The legal department may be aware of one thing. A supervisor may be aware of another. The social media team might be aware of a third. Supervisor and colleagues, and now we start adding up. We have 5, 6, 7 different things that are going on that people are observing, and hopefully now are comfortable reporting. We have to get to a place where the culture, and Dan indicated this earlier, the culture of our organizations are such that we can outstretch a hand to our employees when they need help. Being the perpetrator of extreme violence is not predetermined. We may be able to intervene in somebody's life early in the manifestation of a problem. If we recognize as concerned colleagues and friends that somebody is on a pathway, somebody is in distress, they may only need the intervention of an emergency or an employee assistance program. They might need to talk with someone. They might need a couple of days off. They might need the assistance of a friend or a loved one or a family member. We've reached out on clients' behalves to clergy and friends and family and loved ones and coaches and former teammates on college athletic teams when we know we need to get this person who is clearly in distress, we need to get them the help that they need so that they stop doing what they're doing and they don't travel further along this pathway towards something that's irrevocable. So that's the goal here, is raising awareness to what are these red flags, training the teams on how to deal with them, and not having that overarching, that overly intrusive presence. We need everybody to understand that this is a human issue, this is a community-based issue, and those are the types of solutions we're going to have to start employing.
So everything you guys are saying makes sense. I mean, it comes back to this balance of sort of liberty and security that, especially in the United States, is a fiercely fought topic. I think that there are some really obvious and understandable barriers to why people might be observing some of the behaviors you're talking about and never report them, or might be experiencing some of the things you're talking about and never report them. I mean, I think probably most women that are victims or potential victims of some kind of domestic violence are highly unlikely to go tell their supervisor or HR or legal. And that's a shameful experience for them. It's something that they don't want people to know about. I mean, I can probably think of that with all the indicators that you all talked about. People aren't just going to step forward and be like, oh, by the way, the IRS is, garnished. By the way, I lost my house. So how do we thread that needle? I mean, how do we ensure that, and weighing these scales, you keep adding all these pebbles to the scale, but that even if they're being observed, that they're being reported? And I'm not sure that everyone trusts their employer to handle this information confidentially or appropriately. Like, am I going to get fired if I tell them that, I've been drinking heavily? Am I going to get fired if I tell them that I'm struggling with depression or anxiety? Am I going to get fired if I tell them, that, by the way, my wife and I got divorced because I hit her or something like that? Like, people are not likely to report a lot of these things. And so can we talk a little bit about how a company can foster this culture that we're talking about so that people trust how they're going to handle the information if they report it? And maybe that's a really hard question. Sorry.
Trust is built day by day, and Sherine, you're absolutely right. If someone comes forward and says, hey, I've got an issue with alcohol, I've got an issue with gambling, I need some help, and they get fired and terminated, guess what? No one else is coming forward. So having a threat management team that's got supportive leadership that is going to do interventions that are discreet and quiet and designed to do what they're designed to do, is to help somebody, and to do it in a discreet manner that doesn't impact their ability to do the job. Let me tell you an experience I had at Boston Police. I have a peer support team who would help cops who are in crisis with whether they saw a child in a horrific car accident, a shooting event, whatever it is. We would help them through that critical incident stress. We have cops who are involved with alcohol use, cops in domestic relationship challenges, cops who found themselves in financial problems. I would go to the peer support unit, and the old system was, if you were thinking about harming yourself, they would take your gun away and they would send you up to operations and make you a dispatcher. And they were called the rubber gun squad. And you were, from there on, known, oh, he's in the rubber gun squad. Well, who is going to be coming forward to say, hey, I too feel like I'm in harm's way. I feel like I'm going to hurt myself, but I don't want to be in the rubber gun squad. The rubber gun squad also means you don't have your firearm, you can't do extra duties, and your financial situation is going to be negatively impacted. So I put a peer support team leader in, and he said, you need to give me the ability to build trust. And if I call you and tell you that I need an officer transferred from a unit, you need to give me the authorization to do it and trust me and the team, including our psychologists, to do the right thing. So Brian would call me and say, hey, Chief, I'm going to call District 2. You need to alert the captain that it's okay what I'm doing. And he would call the captain. The captain would know the officer's name. He wouldn't know what was going on, but that officer would then be assigned to the peer support team. They would take them offline. They would get them, whether it was inpatient treatment, whether it was outpatient treatment, whether it was medicine. I don't know what it was. I don't know what they did or how they did, but then that team worked to a point where they were comfortable bringing that officer back. I never knew who had suicidal ideation in that process. I never had to take a concern about whether I had to remove a gun or a firearm. The team, if they thought that their interventions didn't work and that there was no coming back from this, they would then notify the department, only as a last resort. But there were officers who were taken out of line, given the help they needed, brought back on duty. The department never knew their name, and they're doing effective police work today, running towards active shooter events like we saw yesterday in Louisville. So we built that trust, and that led to more people coming forward, more people identifying. We had an app that we put out for all of our police officers that when you were, if you were feeling you were going to harm yourself, people started answering the questions on the app. That app was monitored by the peer support team. Police department didn't know any of the information, didn't know who was using it. The peer support counselors that were on duty would text back and say, based on your answers, you're in trouble. How can I help you? Where are you? Again, I don't know who these officers are. I don't know their names. I can tell you that on 5 occasions during the time I was chief of police, our peer support team intervened with cops who had the gun on their lap with the bottle of Jack Daniels or whatever their choice of alcohol was for that day, the rope over a pipe, and they were able to bring those officers back, get them treatment, get them help without stigmatizing them, and prevent them from taking a permanent solution to what was a temporary problem that was going on in their life. And we've got to encourage our clients, their companies, their safety and security teams to do the same thing. And you're right, there's going to be cynicism here, and that's why the proof is in the pudding. You got to walk the walk, you got to talk the talk, and we need companies to do their job, to care for their team in an effective manner without causing people to back off and say, I don't trust them.
And a lot of this, Sherine, is going to come from third party. You're so right. It may be hard for an individual to even recognize within themselves that they're struggling and reach out for help. So a lot of this is raising the awareness of what these indicators are. And I regret that we have ample data to study. We can look at these incidents in hindsight with absolute clarity. And we can say, here are the 5 things that John, Sherine, Matt, and Danny talked about in next week or next month's active assailant event. Here are the 5 things that people recognized and there was no intervention earlier. Or we can make a determination that we're gonna foster a culture of caring for our employees in this way. We're gonna give them the tools that they need to be effective in managing these threats. And we're gonna break down the barriers to information sharing. So much of this is incumbent on the corporation, on the company, to build the infrastructure that's needed to capture all of these disparate pieces of information, because as we already talked about, 5 or 6 different people may know one thing. But when we put that all together into a bigger picture, we can see clearly that there are issues here, that there is somebody struggling. So it's not only important to collect the information. John and his team do absolutely excellent work in uncovering digital chatter in places that I would have never thought to look. Bringing that to the surface so that it can be investigated properly, it can be assessed properly, that process cannot be weaponized, that there be inherent trust throughout the entire process, but we also need a place to put it and keep it straight. This is a tremendous amount of information. On all of these matters that we are brought into with clients, we are sifting through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of email and social media traffic and text messages and people's individual accounts of what happened. Keeping it straight, especially over an elongated period of time where some of these things may play out, is critical. We need an infrastructure. We need, in order to meet our duty of care requirements, we need to protect our employees from these reasonably perceivable threats to the workplace.
One of the questions that we got was how, and I know, Danny, you've talked a little bit about this, like policies and procedures and governance and the structures that are actually in place that would foster this type of program. Are there like go-bys or ponies that people can put into things like their employee handbook or in their policy and procedures manual or their training? We talked a little bit about the video, the Run, Hide, Fight video, but are there other things that people can put into their repertoire of training and policies and procedures and manuals and whatnot to address some of this?
There's no cookie cutter solution for a policy procedure. It's got to be within the company, within the organization, how they do business. and have some of the basics, and then tailor a response to what they're seeing, what stressors they could be engaged with, what things they can do interventions with. So as long as the policy and the procedure is geared towards gathering information, keeping it as confidential as possible, having a team approach that is looking at this from different seats and viewpoints, and then making sure we've got outcomes that are fair for all involved, that's the secret sauce. As long as we value this information, we're looking at it, we're tracking it, we're seeing that this could be a stressor and a risk factor, and taking it seriously, I think teams will be successful when they set up. But there's no, cookie cutter policy that we can give you that says this will fix all of your problems. It's an individual situation. There's culture. Different parts of the country do things and report things differently. For example, an employee taking a gun to the parking lot of a workplace in Massachusetts would be unheard of. There'd almost be a police SWAT response, right? Employees in Pennsylvania or Kentucky taking a gun and leaving it in their vehicle before they go to work, they're going to go out hunting afterwards. And it's part of the culture and it's understood down there. So making sure you've got an understanding of where your people are, what the climate and the culture is, and what's the baseline and what's off the baseline when you're considering what you're going to do to intervene.
A lot of companies and a lot of organizations have elements of a threat management program already in place. There are functions being performed that may just not be coming together in a way that we now know is leading industry in threat management and addressing these underlying indicators of violence. So a lot of the times we get brought into our clients' organizations, and it's not as hard and complicated as you might think. We don't have to completely retrain a group of people to think differently. It's merely looking at the same information that they look at routinely through a slightly different lens. It's collaborating with their colleagues in a way that we know is better for the end result, but may be hard institutionally. It's breaking down some of those barriers. More often than not, we identify functions of a threat management program that are being carried out, whether it be by legal counsel, the security department, the facilities department, the risk management teams, the list goes on, right? Our client base, we've seen it all over the map. But the important part is bringing it all under one roof so that these incidents can be investigated and assessed in a uniform fashion, and we don't leave anything unturned. We don't handle any one situation differently than we did another. Again, in fiercely protecting our duty of care requirements.
We're getting a bunch of questions, and I mean, I know we're about 20 minutes away from the end of this, so I want to address some of the questions that we're getting. One of them, we talked a little bit, a couple times about training to respond to this incident and what that actually looks like. And Danny, you made the statement that you can't just watch the video, you actually have to do the training, you have to know how to respond. And having gone through active shooter training, I can tell you that it is unlike, even though it's not real, it's unlike anything you've ever been through ever. It's incredibly stressful and it's incredibly taxing and traumatic on you even when you know it's fake. How can companies realistically train to better respond in the event an incident does occur? And in the aftermath, like sort of what can they do to help their people recover, not just their company, but their actual people recover from what they experienced?
You have to train the way you're going to respond and respond the way you're going to train. You've got to get that stimulus that makes that muscle memory. When we looked at the Nashville shooting last week, those cops were responding, someone pulled the fire alarm. We trained not to pull the fire alarm. In any event, the fire alarm was pulled. That's the deal they were dealt. They had to deal with that alarm that was going off that was impacting their ability to find where those shots were. That was an additional stressor. It's never going to be the perfect plan. It's not about having a perfect plan. It's about having a planning process in your head for that day, for what you find yourself in. And, my ability to respond is different than a 24-year-old young guy who just came off the drill field of Paris Island, who's working in the loading dock and is in the best shape of his entire life, right? That's different than the 64-year-old accountant with a bad knee and a bad hip who's got a cane that's on the 24th floor. So everyone's got to respond the best way they can for the situation they're going to find themselves in. So you've got to give people the options, but the training has to be reinforced and it's got to be real. I don't see a lot of companies, and we have a few companies who actually want to do exercises where we simulate the stress. We had active shooter training where we had 12-year-old kids with, melange wounds that were trying to grab police officers' pant legs to try and get them to not go to the sound of the gunfire, but to help a baby who needed to be taken out of the shooting situation. Cops with kids, they want to stop and help that child. So we had to train that thought out of them for the greater mission. But we don't need, police and law enforcement have to train that way. Companies need to make it realistic. Let's actually get people to walk out of the building. Let's get people to find that fire exit. Let's get people to actually get under a desk. Let's see exactly what it looks like to try and, shut your phone off or silence your phone. I'm a big believer in actually keeping your phone on. And I train folks to, within 2 minutes, this is most likely going to be over. 7-minute response time for law enforcement. I train people to get through it emotionally by having conversations with their family. I'm in the second floor conference room. I'm okay. I'm here with Matt. I'm here with John. John's got an injured foot. Sherine is shot. We need help as soon as the police can get here in the second floor conference room. I'm giving assignments if I'm with more than one person in the room. Hey, John, you get on Twitter. What are they saying about the shooter? Matt, what's Facebook saying about, the police? Are they here yet? Are they still hearing gunshots? And we're going to have that conversation and work our way through that. The training has to address those challenges and problems, and it can't be something we've showed a video once. You got to remind people, and you might have to then take it out of the conference room where they saw a PowerPoint and go to the different workplaces and say to this 64-year-old accountant, your best solution, this office has a solid door. You've got a lock the door, get down on the ground, stay out of a, chest high gunfire, and get on your clock and wait for your 5 minutes. So sometimes having individual training can be helpful to take it off that PowerPoint and walk people through their facilities for what their possibilities are to keep themselves safe. If they haven't thought about it ahead of time, then they won't. When what happens is we freeze, we fight, or we flee, and those chemicals flood our brain, and we can't do either of that until we take a deep breath. Take that deep cleansing breath, dump the cortisol, dump the adrenaline, and go to this file cabinet of what am I going to do in this room? In this room, Matt and I are going to do this. On the first floor, Matt and I are going to do something different. We want to make sure that we're providing clients with that deep breath, and then they go into the action and respond the way that they think is appropriate for what they're finding. Run, hide, fight is great, but I might start running and then I have to hide, and then guess what? I get information that the person's in the other tower of the building. Well, maybe I can stay safe where I am, or maybe I need to now go back and run out the door. So it's not having a perfect plan. It's having a planning process for the crisis we find ourselves in that particular moment.
Matt, maybe you can address this question that just came in. What about businesses that are open to the public? I mean, that creates like a completely different element than an office building, somewhere that you can secure and control who's coming in and out.
Yeah, it does, Sherine. It presents some very unique challenges, and I think the byproduct of what we're trying to do here is give people the tools and the awareness that they need, where they can protect themselves and the people they care about, or random strangers, whether these incidents happen in their workplace, whether they happen at the movie theater, at the shopping mall, at the car dealership, or anywhere in between, while they're out with their family and their friends and their kids and their loved ones. There is a need for us to all be on the same page in understanding how to respond to these types of incidents. Danny mentioned, when these events happen, some people do go into lockdown. Some people struggle to take action, taking that deep breath, encouraging the people around you to take a deep breath. Like Danny said, giving assignments, get on your phone, see what they're saying on Twitter. These are things where the people in the group, the people in the facility that is impacted are going to have to step up and take a leadership role. There are different assignments for different people. There are different needs given the situation, but we all have to understand in the moments of violence, it's critical to survive the incident. So whether it's running, whether it's hiding, whether it's fighting, or whether it's a hybrid and a transition from one to the next, we have to think through these issues. When we go to a public venue, I do this, and my friends and family will tell you sometimes maybe it's annoying, but identifying where are the emergency exits. If I go into a restaurant and something happens, I already have a plan. I can tell you, maybe it's my upbringing, maybe it's my former life, maybe it's what we do for our clients, maybe it's, you know, all of those series of events that have brought me to where I am. But understanding that there's an exit out the back that the chefs and the sous chefs use to load and unload deliveries, go out the back. When you're in a shopping mall, there are loading docks. When you're in a corporate high-rise building like this, there are emergency exits, there are freight elevators, there are ways out of a facility, and it's incumbent upon all of us in these moments of violence to understand our body's response, recognize that it's normal, and employ some of the things that we impart on our clients. And what Danny just indicated, taking that deep breath, going into the filing cabinet of trainings that you've had. I can tell you that, you know, people don't rise to the occasion in catastrophic events like this. They fall to their highest levels of training. So we want to think through it. We want to encourage our colleagues and our loved ones and our employers to think through these things, come up with a plan, train that plan, and give us the resources that we need to make that plan actionable.
And Sherine, there's all types of violence, right? So robberies could come to a facility where the public's welcome in. So we've got to have our, you know, architectural design, our security program, whether it's staff security, whether it's police patrols in the area, keeping people out of protective areas. They might, and robberies occur all the time. For the most part, robberies are non-violent. They're over in 60 seconds. If you resist a robber, the likelihood of getting injured go up by 70%. By giving people what they want, give them the money, give them the shoes, they go on their way, and a robbery is over and done. What these active assailant events are, where people are trying to commit suicide by committing homicide, the stats, the reports are telling us the most likely this is going to occur is at a workplace from a former employee or a current employee who's disgruntled, or a domestic violence person. There are the one-offs, sure, where anyone in random violence occurs all through. We saw that yesterday. They're having the active shooter event at the bank, and you know, a shooting occurred outside a local community college. Those events are still going to occur. We want to mitigate them. We want to mitigate the risk that we are most likely going to see. And you know, sometimes we can't handle all things all the time, but a good layered security program will do the best thing to try and minimize the effects of a violent event occurring at a publicly open workplace.
John, one of the questions is for you. You talked a little bit about the who, the what, and the where online, and I think some of the wheres online are not common knowledge for most people that aren't, you know, trolling around the various chat rooms and forums and whatnot on the web. How would a company even know where to start to build out that sort of monitoring process for their business?
I think it starts with understanding their own digital footprint, as I talked about earlier. Understand where people will be talking about them, their employees, and their company in the main. There's loads of open source tools available. You know, start with Google. Look for yourself and your important assets, and see where the conversation is. But as I said a number of times, people change. People move locations. People will try and evade. If they want to talk about something that's at a higher level of risk, that's illegal, they are less likely to do it in obvious places that can be found. And that's where you need help. You need help with this problem. You need help with understanding what's important to you, what's important to monitor, what's important to be notified, and how to do that in real time, 24 hours a day is a significant challenge that we would strongly say get support with it.
And then the last question that I have is about the actual process of handling information as it comes in. So you're putting all these pebbles on the scale, and how are you handling that? How are you containing it? How are you conducting, quote unquote, that investigation, if that's what it's requiring, in a way that's preserving the potential alleged person's reputation, right? But you know, who knows what all of this means. It could just be they're having a rough time in life, but at the same time, you know, investigating it to the extent that you need to be.
So I know we have the benefit, of course, at Kroll of having probably what I think is one of the most powerful case management systems out there, and it wasn't by chance that that the firm acquired Resolver about a year ago, a little more. The important part here is having a process in which information can't be lost, misplaced, or overlooked. So having that intact investigative process, not in a Word document, not in an Excel spreadsheet. These are complicated issues. There are hundreds or thousands of moving parts. There are lots of different intersection points. We as human beings need a proper mechanism, a proper infrastructure, a proper, I'll call it case management system to keep all of these interviews that we conduct, the documents that we review, the thousands or tens of thousands of pieces of online and social media chatter that threat analysts will go through, the reports from public forum that we'll look at, criminal histories and civil histories and indicators of financial strain or stress. Keeping all of that straight. In law enforcement, we had incredibly powerful investigative case management systems. It's no different here. It's no different for corporations. It's no different for private clients. As I started, we have the benefit of owning Resolver. I think is probably one of the most powerful platforms to do this in the corporate world. We employ those services and those capabilities on behalf of our clients. There has to be a formalized, structured process because the material is too important. We cannot leave to chance any element of a threat management investigation or assessment. And we want to be able to say at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the investigation, we did a comprehensive assessment and we are either confident that intervention is needed or we are confident that this person has either recovered or is on a path to recovery.
Sherine, whatever you're using to do your case management, it's important that everyone can get into it that's on this threat management team, that they can see data and put data in. The most important thing is that you're working through the direction, either the general counsel's office or outside counsel, so that all of your investigation, all of these files are protected and the confidentiality is assured. Let's face it, we help clients with these challenges, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be litigation coming from this, an arbitration or a grievance. So we want to make sure we're working in direction of counsel, making sure that we're taking, is there a contract? Is there a union issue? Is there an employment agreement issue that we have to make sure we're aware of when we're having advice and guidance on how they deal with this employee and how they intervene? So making sure that attorneys are involved in the process up front is a key element as well.
Thanks to all of you. Those are all the questions that we've gotten from the crowd. So unless you guys have something else that you think we should address, or if anyone has any additional questions before we wrap up, I think it's been extremely helpful and hopefully has given people some useful information that they could take back to their organizations and begin implementing. I'll just give it a minute to see if anyone has any additional questions. And in the meantime, to the extent that you have questions that you don't want to ask in this public forum, or you want to engage with Matt, Danny, or John outside of this, you can find their contact information on our website, which is just www.kroll.com. I think John, CRISP, we acquired. So do you have a different website? Is it crispthinking.com? Is that right?
It is, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. In the process of integrating. So theirs is CRISP, C-R-I-S-P, thinking.com. Feel free to reach out. I mean, we're here to help. This is something that we feel passionate about and that we're hopeful we can stem the tide of. Great. So I don't see any additional questions. I'll give you all your time back. Thank you very much for spending this morning with us. And we wish you a really safe and productive weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.